I promise I will not spend today reading slides to you, but I do think it is important for us just to see and hear the language that is coming from the state legislature as it relates to our main funding sources. The Housing Stability Council, in alignment with preliminary findings from the statewide housing plan, shall make recommendations to the Director of Oregon Housing and Community Services about how to prioritize funding for the emergency housing account and the state homeless assistance program to ensure that funds are being spent as efficiently and effectively as possible. At a minimum, the council shall consider how the use of funding incentivizes regionally and nationally recognized best practices. Thank you. And outcome-oriented strategies to create a more effective system to prevent and reduce homelessness. The director shall present recommendations to the legislature by February 28, 2019. So this was our directive as set forth. And as you will see, it calls out specifically EHA and SHAP. But as we got into these discussions, they really became more global discussions about OHCS funding in general, basically starting with a focus on our homeless services programs. So, like I said, there are a lot of words there, but we want to start breaking that down to realize all the things that we're really trying to address. I'm going to turn it over to Mariah.
Hello, everyone. So we got this directive, and it really was because there was a desire to increase funding, to increase opportunities to do this work throughout the state, but also a need for more accountability. That was the legislature's view on why this budget note came down. And it was a big, lengthy paragraph with, lots of big words. And so we tried to break it down and figure out what are our real goals in these conversations and how can we best achieve those goals. And so the first one that really called out to us, alignment with the statewide housing plan. Hopefully you all have had a chance to look at our statewide housing plan, breaking new ground. I think there's some copies in the back. But one of the top 6 priorities we have is homelessness, specifically ending veterans' homelessness, addressing family with children's homelessness, and a number of other top priorities there. So really thinking with that lens, it was actually quite perfect timing, because when we started these budget note conversations, it was right as we were getting to the public draft version of the statewide housing plan. So we were really able to create some synthesis between those two in terms of creating our strategies to support the budget note work that was also happening. Use of outcomes-oriented strategies. This is something that has been in conversation for a long time. Certainly, some of you in this room were able to visit with Washington State last year and talk about their use of outcomes-oriented strategies and how we can move towards ensuring that we're measuring the real impacts on the ground, ensuring that we're not just measuring outputs and widgets, that we're really looking at how we change people's lives. Establishment of funding priorities for EHA and SHAP is kind of the nuts and bolts of it, really thinking about those pieces. Use of best practices in homeless service delivery. How can we ensure standardization of those best practices with still honoring the local component, still ensuring that people are able to have the flexibility to do what their communities need. And all of this kind of wraps up into creating a more efficient and effective system to ultimately prevent and reduce homelessness. So that's the goals we were looking for. We believe that overall we were pretty successful in these conversations. They were big, tough, difficult conversations at times, but when we look back, we're quite proud of the work. And so in your packets there is the budget note report that has gone to the legislature. We have yet to testify yet, but it has been viewed by the speaker and appropriate committees at this point. And so some of the things that we've been asked to call out, why were we successful? These are some of the 4 things that we think help to bring us along this journey. And we'll talk a little bit about those. So one of them is committing to a collaborative process. As I'll talk about in a moment, this was not a black box project where the director of OHCS and any other top leaders just sat down and made these decisions in a black box. We really tried to create some transparency. In fact, some of you might remember me from last September. I came in and led a conversation where we tried to gather some information from you all about what priorities you were seeing and what best practices you wanted to see encouraged and implemented on the ground. All of that was filtered back into these conversations. Connecting shared, again, this goes back to that local piece, connecting shared statewide outcomes for that accountability, transparency, consistency piece that the legislature is really looking for, was still really honoring the local component. We know that the systems are different in different parts of the state. We really recognize that. And how can we lift all ships and still have that local flexibility? Instituting the use of national best practices, that was a real big component in this, is how can we bring the best that's being done everywhere else, including here, not just everywhere else, but also leveraging what's done here. And so I know that, excuse me, I know that we actually did a survey of all the CAAs to find out who's already doing these best practices, how much are you already doing them, what would you like to do? You want to do this, but right now you don't feel that you have the support to do it, or you don't feel like you have the capacity or the knowledge space within your community to do it. So we did some surveying around that and really tried to bring in some national best practices. And then looking forward, how do we balance accountability with capacity building? And really trying to think about, this is not tomorrow what's going to happen, right? And that was one of our guiding agreements, was that this is not about creating punitive measures. It's about a learning process where we can all improve in the long run, and really creating a more phased approach, not a black and white, the world is turning tomorrow sort of situation. So these approaches to us were what allowed us, in our minds and hopefully in yours, to have a successful process. I'm a facilitator, and I had the honor of getting to facilitate the actual budget note discussions and negotiations and collaborations, whatever you want to call it. And so this was a part that was really, really important to me, that we had the expertise of all different levels, of all different leadership levels in these conversations. And that we really encouraged that early buy-in, that we started these conversations in venues like this, in venues like the CAPO board meeting, in venues like bringing Washington, with CAPO's help, bringing Washington Department of Commerce down to learn from our peers, right? Like, we tried to do this kind of go slow to go fast mentality. And it was comprehensive. We, like Christy said, we could have just focused on the dollars and cents of BHA and SHAP, but we actually tried to take a little more comprehensive look and recognize that these funding systems work together in complex ways. And how can we think about this more holistically? So to do that, we brought together this committee, which had representation from our Housing Stability Council. That's our advisory and governing policy body at OHCS. So that's who we ultimately are accountable to from a policy direction perspective. We also brought in community action agencies, and CAPO got to decide who was representative, and I think they did a great job of getting a really diverse representation. We had rural, we had urban, we had just a real nice diversity of voices that were brought in, and then also our own staff from OHCS. So Margaret, Claire, who's not with us today, Christy, and Vicki Massey, who's in the back, were all represented on in this committee, and we had lots of conversations and met for 4 months, like almost every 2 weeks for 4 months. Really got to know each other. I think we came in, very few people had worked closely together, and there was a lot of trust building and relationship building and challenging of assumptions about the different roles that we brought to the space that we were able to work through and ultimately, I think, meet those goals we laid out. So here's just a little view of the timeline that we took over the last few months. And then just a few of the pieces that I think within the process were really successful. We did use a consensus building design, so we didn't have to get up to 100% consensus, but we had to get to a point where everyone could live with and support all of the recommendations. And I'll tell you that when we did initial temperature checks, we were not all on the same page. And by the end of it, we were. So I think we came a long ways in terms of understanding where people were coming from and taking really seriously the different perspectives that were brought to the table, why this wouldn't work in my community, or how this could work in my community, right? That kind of shift really happened. The stakeholder feedback mechanisms were really important. So we had our 4 CAA representatives, and they were going out and they were talking to their peers, and they were talking to their staffs. They were also reporting out through the CAPO Homeless and Housing Committee. The H&H was like, which one is first?
It doesn't matter.
So many acronyms, so many acronyms. And so we had these regular check-ins, right, with the larger CAPO body to ensure that what we were doing wasn't in a black box. That was one of our primary goals, was that we didn't want these decisions to be made in a vacuum. And so after each of these meetings, materials were provided, we would get feedback, we would, readdress things, we would change things up, we would see what we could do. I am a facilitator. I think I'm a co-partial facilitator, so yes, I do work for OHCS, but really when I'm in that sort of space, my goal was to help everyone do their best thinking. And I know that a couple of people said that was a really helpful space for them to be able to have kind of the safety of one of them not having to facilitate, being able to fully and actively participate while leaving the nitty gritty, how are we going to use our time, up to someone like me who really was in it to meet those goals, not to advance any particular agenda. And we did use some guiding agreements. I'm losing my voice. We did list some guiding agreements that were really helpful, and those are some pretty simple things like, we will not automatically implement anything without your knowledge. Like, this is going to be a phased-in approach. I'm trying to remember what some of the other ones were. That collaboration doesn't end when we submit this report. That was a really key one, that we will continue in partnership to develop out the, thank you, Rosaria, to develop out what this looks like in implementation and operationalizing. I'm actually going to take a moment to take a drink of water here, but I want to turn it over for just a moment if Martine's willing. Martine was one of the individuals on our committee. You want a microphone? And I'd love for him to just share a little bit of his experience. OHDC was a major topic in ours, so he was frequently in the spotlight.
Thank you, Mariah and Christy. So that process, it's like wearing a long sleeve shirt because the bruises are all, can't see it. It wasn't an easy process because you had some divergent views coming together for a common good. And you had, a directive from the legislature to get this done. You had your Housing Stability Council members, CAA directors, and senior staff from OHCS coming together to put together a product that's going to hopefully make the system better. And it was, as Maria was saying, we weren't all on the same page to begin with. There was some temperature checks, and we had some cards that went from green to red, and there was some discussions where they were all red, and we wanted to get to a green, and so that meant we had to really dig down and dig deep and have some really open and hard discussions, not only in that body of the budget committee, but then taking it back to our stakeholders and having those discussions. Because in our charge was to then come back for the next meeting, prepared with that feedback to move forward on those discussions. So in addition to the 4 months of meetings, we had a lot of homework in between as well. So some of you may have been in contact with your CAA directors as you brought back that feedback so that they can come prepared for the next meeting. And I just got to say that the process, although it was 4 months, it seems lengthy looking at it now. It really went, fairly quickly because it was such intense work, and it was so vital for what the network was going to be able to provide in the future. I was really proud to be part of that group and being part of this discussion and representing you all and all the customers we serve.
All right. It was a sprint for sure. Sprint and marathon at the same time. So outcome tools, that was our next big key to our success, is how are we going, and this was directly called out in the budget note, but how are we going to turn good intentions into measurable outcomes? How are we going to ensure that we really are trying to reach the same set of goals? And so we looked at, and in your packet is the EPIC outcomes tool, and we have an entire section on that, so I'm going to go through it pretty briefly right now, just at an overview level. And then also, it happens to correspond with our MGA opportunity to rewrite. So how can we leverage the MG? That was a big part of our conversation. How can we leverage the MGA as a vehicle for bringing these increased outcomes focus, but also increased capacity focus into the picture? So early on in the conversation, we had these conversations about North Stars and what was going to be our North Star, and we ended up with a constellation of North Stars, and recognizing that to be successful in each community and statewide, again, that consistency and flexibility, we needed to prioritize four things essentially, and then actually there's a kind of there's a very important fifth one. So ending homelessness. I mean, that is the goal, right? Like that is the goal, is to end homelessness. So that we really started there. That's our first E, ending homelessness. We all know that prevention is extremely important and a major part of all of your work. So preventing homelessness, came very quickly to the forefront. And then in thinking about how we do our work and who we serve, we have to start where we're at. We have to meet ourselves at where we're at. And so we recognize that there needs to be a focus on actually the inclusion and diversity starting at the community action agencies themselves and looking at your capacity as an organization internally to do this work on behalf of all Oregonians in an equitable and inclusive manner. And then capacity of the organization, and then also capacity of the community. And so how we know that you are one piece of a much larger puzzle, right? And so one of the things that came back initially was, well, we can't control that. Well, we can't control this, and it's true. Like the length of what you can control around employment services or rent levels, things like that are potentially out of your control, but we tried to look at how are you integrating and collaborating and partnering with others in the community to ensure that there's a holistic system. So that was our fourth major one, and one random day when we were sitting there going, how do we think about these four things? Vicki Massey in a stroke of brilliance said, well, it's quite epic, isn't it? And so thus we have the EPIC card and the EPIC tool, and I commend her for coming up with a really great acronym from where I was just going, I have no idea how we're going to put this in a framework. And then we also really talked about the importance of equity and racial justice. We had some true passionate champions in that work that really challenged us to think critically and creatively about how we bring those components into this work. And ultimately, we recognize that that's a part of all of this, that we have to bring an equity and racial justice lens to ending homelessness, to preventing homelessness, to how we create more inclusive and diverse capacity within our organizations, and with how we partner and collaborate within our communities. Super important. And those are big outcomes, right? And so we then broke it down into performance measures. And those performance measures, we will continue with our 2 KPMs that we've had for quite a while. But then in addition, there's these new performance measures that actually you get to choose. And you're going to have that ability to go through an activity here shortly to make those choices. And the reason that we created choices instead of mandates was, again, trying to recognize that every community is a little different. And one of the really eye-opening ones for me was around preventing homelessness. I think there's only actually 2 options on that one. And 2 of our CAA representatives had completely different views. One's like, I would never choose that one, and the other one's like, well, I would never choose that one. And they both came to the table going, well, we should just take the other one away. And then they were able to talk to each other across the table and say, well, here's why this measure matters to my community. Here's why this is a measure that actually means something to how my staff do their work. And through that conversation, we're able to recognize, while I wouldn't adopt that measure for my community, I understand and value and respect why you would, and I understand why it helps us to measure at the larger level overall prevention of homelessness. So just a little example of what I thought was a particular poignant moment in recognizing how difficult it is to make that balance between consistency and local flexibility. I have the... And so then we looked at, well, we have this wonderful vehicle, the Master Grant Agreement. So how can we use the MGA to bring forward, to use that vehicle to actually operationalize this? So we have the use of the EPIC tool, and then we also looked at how to and you're gonna have lots of conversations about the fiscal standards and stuff like that, how to increase our outcomes and increase our consistency across the board with operational standards. So administrative standards, fiscal standards, and service delivery standards, which I think I'm gonna pass it off to Christy here in a second to talk about that, but those are the best practices that we really talked a lot about, is how to integrate these best practices into service delivery standards. So again, trying to put all this work into a vehicle that we already have and a framework we have. Okay, I think I'm gonna pass it off for you for best practices.
All right, so we talked a little bit about the MGA and how it is going to be different this year, and I think you guys have already received the draft work plan, correct? So part of our agreement in starting this budget note work was that as OHCS, we really committed to you to reducing the bureaucracy that has been in place for a while and coming up with new formats and approaches and content to make this part of the work easier for you. We can't necessarily make, you know, sort of the environment or other things simplified, but this we do have control over. So we worked through that process of streamlining that MGA, and as many of you know, we have been also working with you on changing our fiscal standards. And so Caleb is gonna come tomorrow and talk to you guys about that, but I think many of you have already heard that information. So there are gonna be some things in the MGA that look the same, right? Like we have to get certain information from you. There are certain things, elements that are legislatively required or required by the rules. But this is sort of the new exciting piece for us, is that we've never had anything in the contract that required the use of best practices. And this really harkens me back to our last conversation at the convening in September that we held here as well. I remember we had an initial discussion and broke out into groups about the budget notes. We could just talk about outcomes orientation and look at different performance measures, and you guys gave us feedback about what would be important and meaningful to measure. And I'll remember Washington County in our breakout saying, you know, we've just been talking about it, and we can talk about innovation all day, but where we really innovate is taking those best practices and making them work in our community. And we know that that may look different in every other community. That's something that just stuck with me, because I feel like putting forward this group of best practices is probably something a lot of you are already doing to some degree. And some of them are also required by your offenders. Oh, look at that, right? Like using housing first for maximizing your participation in coordinated entry. You know, again, we talked about this morning having high numbers of folks living unsheltered. We want to make sure they have access to shelters. And of course, everything that flows from that entry point into the system. And we want to make sure that our system reflects the needs and desires of the people who use it. So we're going to be talking about that. And we already saw on the EPIC card, intentionally acting to reduce racial disparities. So I don't know that I'm going to read these to you. Just because we did kind of just talk about a little bit of a summary, and I think probably most of you are familiar, but this is just sort of our cheat sheet for that right now. So what does this mean to you? There are new things in your contract, and these are some pretty high-level concepts, right? Like I think we all intellectually understand housing first, but maybe we don't understand how to monitor for housing first or truly evaluate, you know, fidelity to the model. So I just want to stop, pause, take a breath, and say, we're not going to be monitoring you come this biennium to say you are not housing first enough, therefore you get a finding. Like, that's not going to happen. So we've already talked about this is a phased-in approach. We're using this period of time to really educate all of us, to build our own capacities. And we're going to be making some really big investments in technical assistance and training from OHCS's perspective. So I don't think we had a single budget note conversation without the terms capacity building or technical assistance or training being in that conversation, no matter what it was that we talked about. You know, I think as organizations, you've really been through an interesting history, having just a depth of work and a sudden large increase in funding, and then trying to operationalize that, not really knowing if that funding level was going to be awarded in the next biennium. So I think there are definitely some fear there, right, in terms of how do you make all of this work? And how do you make sure that your staff is sufficiently built up and trained, that they're going to national conferences, or that they're able to access resources that they need to do their jobs. So we want to sort of take that burden from you as best that we can. We want to make sure that you guys are able to access those trainings, and we can work to bring some of those here so it's more convenient to you. You don't have to travel everywhere across the country. But we also own that we need to be trained as well. There's a lot of content and skill that we need to embrace, and CAPO, as all of our support and partnership, is going to embrace as well. And I think we all felt really good about this piece. I don't think there was anyone who said, well, you know, maybe we should just not use some of that EHA discretionary funding for supporting each other. There was discussion on all levels, from data entry to having a shared server in your office to really exploring detailed technical assistance work on best practices. And so the question, you know, begs, what are the accountability expectations? Like, how am I, as a community action agency, going to meet all of these new standards and requirements? And so, again, we're going to be working through some of that, but what we're really looking at doing right away is improved data quality and reporting, right? We're moving towards outcomes orientation, which means we're going to have to rely on our data to tell us a story, to give us some good baselines of where we are right now, how we're performing across different project types and interventions, so that we can know where to apply that capacity building and training. And we're really going to focus that capacity building on the EPIC outcome performance measures that we'll be looking at, as well as the service delivery standards, the best practices that we've identified. And so I just had to make sure that we include this at the bottom. During this time, no punitive measures like funding rescission will be taken regarding your performance in achieving those things. So I just want to be clear that moving towards outcomes orientation is not an attempt to separate funding from anyone's efforts and put it somewhere else. We want to make sure that the state is completely and fully funded to do this work, because we know that the need is everywhere as well. So I hope that maybe relieves a little bit of stress. So we did say this is phased work. And we're going to be looking at what the next biennium looks like. Again, there's a little bit of the, what's the expression, we're building the plane as we're flying it happening here. Or I think our chair said, we're changing the tire on the car as we're driving it. That was a new one for me. I don't know about that one. But so what we're really looking at doing is tailoring our approach, right? We're looking at evaluating you as a community action agency and where you are, and providing more of a tailored approach to the support that you need. And so as long as you are progressing along that spectrum and that plan that you have for yourself, that is going to be the goal. So some of the ways that I think we outlined as possible ways that we can intervene and help move processes along is having an integrator travel to meet with you and brainstorm about solutions, or bringing in other community members into discussions, or providing other information or contacts who can help you on the local level. Another example would be having OHCS look at proposals to address some of the issues and prevent funding rescission, down the road. Or if there's any sort of political engagement or advocacy work, we can work with you to ensure that all the parties are involved in planning discussions. And so, funding, among other funding priority recommendations, some of the things that came out of this were the opportunity that we have to use EHA discretionary money to really make sure that everyone is adequately positioned to do the work, especially for you guys. I know one thing that came out of it was the use of that discretionary fund to really support our work in addressing racial disparities in our systems as well. That was a big call out. And making sure that we have that pot of innovation funding available for the things that you recognize you need to tweak and do differently, or there may not be a funding source for. And so this is just kind of outlining some of what Mariah already discussed is, we committed to a collaborative process, connected shared outcomes with local choice, instituted the use of best practices, and balanced the accountability with sort of the training and capacity building in this phased-in approach. So that's all we have for a presentation. We do have some time for questions. Yes, Martha.
Okay, everyone else has heard this, you can just close your ears. I have a threshold problem about being able to comply. It's something that we've talked about many times before, but our information systems that we currently utilize are not customizable. They are not workable. They don't give us the kind of feedback that we need to engage in or transform to best practices. We've been trying to move to outcome measurements for years, but you cannot do that within Opus and Service Point because the systems are beyond our ability to control. My question is, what in the OHCS strategic plan and what as part of this new MGA, what is the game plan to make it possible for us to have a data system that works?
We hear you. So one of my biggest struggles with entering into this budget note process was, it was a call to change everything, examine everything, and we didn't really have time for that. And we very specifically said we cannot address all the issues around HMIS in 4 months and deal with anything else. And so we basically agreed as a committee that that was a whole other body of work. And
You're starting now.
which we are committed to starting now. So I don't have a plan or a completely fleshed out answer, except to say that as part of our own capacity building, OHCS is going to be in this space a lot more. We are hiring an HMIS administrator. I think Megan would be really happy if I plugged that right now. We have a position open that closes on Friday. If you know anyone who may be interested, take a look. Who is going to be leading our HMIS efforts, because we recognize that we are under capacity to completely deal with this issue. And of course, we technically do not have the authority to either, because we do not own HMIS. It is bought and paid for by the continuums, and it is managed by Portland Housing Bureau. And so we, at this time, can assume a role of advocacy. But I just want to share that it's a huge concern for us. And
is that part of your current strategic plan?
Yes,
would
it
you
is.
See that? So what would that look like? What does that sound like?
So we are statewide housing plan planning right now. And as part of that, under our homeless priority, we have strategic initiatives. I can't remember the words we're using, strategies, strategic initiatives. And so we have taken sort of the work of 5 years and just started the process of pulling out what are our priorities for year 1. So one of those is HMIS, all things HMIS. We do not have what we need right now to do this. We're going to talk about the EPIC card today, and you're going to look at specific performance measures, and I can tell you right now that we are not able to measure those with the way that the current system is set up. So we are highly motivated to increase data access, data sharing. We are consistently hearing from you about vendor issues. And Megan's going to talk more about this as we go into our discussion about the EPIC outcomes tool. We are going to be more involved with the vendors. We are going to be more involved with PHB. We are going to be more involved in the entire world of HMIS going forward. So I say that just to...
Black hole.
HMIS is a little bit of a wormhole.
Yeah.
I say that just to say I don't have a complete answer, but I can tell you what our priority is.
Martha, just to directly answer your question, on the back here on the strategies, number 4 is enhance the state's and homeless service providers' data and research capability to understand and address homeless needs across Oregon in order to establish outcomes for homeless service investments and continually evaluate effectiveness of the work. Read HMIS governance and HMIS process systems. Like that is that big long sentence. The first few action initiatives are all around how are we going to do this? We are in conversations with PHB right now, with HUD right now, around what can we do to make the system work for what we need it to do, and who needs to administer that. I mean, that's on the table. So just so you know, it is one of Margaret's top priorities in this realm for the year. I meet with her once a week, and I will tell you that she is constantly like, we're on HMIS, right? We're going to be moving forward on this, right? Like this, she knows that this is not possible, that these strategies for the 5 years are not possible without addressing HMIS.
Thank you.
Good.
No problem.
Good job.
Well, I mean, we want the strategies, and like I said, for the last 5, 7 years, we've been talking about outcomes, but if you can't measure them, how do you?
Yeah.
So we're glad that the state is invested in outcomes. We're glad that the state is invested in figuring out a information system that works for all the programs, not just for housing. And we are thrilled. And so Janet,
Yeah.
do you want to say anything about a CAFO committee?
Martha, I just love you. So we're going to be meeting, some of us are going to be, no, I don't need it, no. Some of us are going to be meeting in Spokane at this Region 10 meeting to talk about what we think would be a good solution for this problem, and we're going to take that to Claire and Margaret and hopefully get them to agree with us, because most of us think that Service Point is not going to work the way we're trying to. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think a lot's on the table, and I believe we're now coming to the table in a stronger position because we did this work, because we're now able to talk to PHB and others involved and say, this is what we need a system to do. Whereas before it was, we need the system to be better, and it was a laundry list. I think we're now coming with a much clearer ask and clearer expectations of where we're trying to go. So yes, hopefully we will be getting there too. It's going to be a sprint and a marathon, even more than the budget note, though. In the back?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think there should be a survey of kind of all of us, because, like, hallelujah is what I'm saying to this, but we all probably have a little bit different ways that we bump up against this. And, like, the reporting part, like the putting data in and not being able to get the data out without a lot of weird little things and having to do workarounds and everything. I know that all of us are dealing with that, and we might all have a little different way that we could give input on that.
Because, yeah, I just want to add to it, because there are some ways that Service Point reports actually do give us an awful lot of good data.
Yeah.
You know, so for some of the, like the quarterly reports, we get pretty much good data from the Service Point reports that we can generate. However, for example, the CSDG reports, they don't dovetail at all
Right.
almost yearly at all, with just a portion, with service point reporting capabilities at this point, as I understand them. And so that's a real disconnect right there. And as new outcomes are brought into the expectation forefront, I'm sure there'll be more gaps.
I didn't mean to intimate that, that everyone would be forced onto one system or anything like that. I think what people wanted to do
Right.
was to find out what everyone was
Yeah.
doing and then figure out the best plug and play. I mean, technology has moved to the place where we can accommodate lots of different things. And it's difficult for the state to move quickly as we need. And maybe some of you are more patient than I am, but I mean, we've been talking about outcomes for a long time. And it would be really nice to be able to measure them. And so that's really all we're talking about an investigation. And maybe working with the state more closely to help them understand what systems we've got and see if there's a way to streamline the system. Has more time with our clients, less time with the computer.
100%. Other questions?
Well, I just have a comment. On your EPIC outcomes tool, it says the first biennium, 1921, will be used to ensure quality data collection, get reliable baselines, and provide substantial training and technical assistance. And I just want to echo what Martha is saying, is that I'm really concerned that here we are going into the next biennium, and we're going to accomplish these things so that we can all be compliant come 22. I don't see it happening with our tools that we have right now. And so I'm just concerned that we are going to have a lot of pressure on us to be outcome-based without having the necessary tools to achieve that. So I really encourage the department to,
Listen to us.
well, move a lot more quickly. I think this has been brought up in a number of venues, and we get the same clear message, we're working on it. But this is timely, and for us out in the community to think we're going to be outcome-based, you say there's not going to be any reduction in funding for this time period, that doesn't mean cut 22. So if we don't have the tools to meet the objectives, then that's concerning for me and for my communities that we serve. So I'm concerned about this, and I feel like our hands are tied, and we have to wait for OHCS to either get on board or make a decision that what we're using right now is not working and we have to move on.
I thank you for being comfortable enough to express that in this room. I know that people don't always feel that, right? Especially when you're talking to a funder. So I appreciate you saying that. I think it's really honest to say I have some concerns, I'm worried about this. And so I want to address that in part by saying, I think some of the responsibility that you're worried about is on us. I think that some of that data analysis.
I don't think we disagree with that.
Yeah.
All on you. No, it's on us. It's a partnership.
We are not expecting each community action agency to become a wholesale data organization, right? Like where you are doing all of the work with the external community and then somehow you're a hub of data reporting and analysis and you're pumping out data dashboards and reports. I mean, that is not the vision. And that
is what we do right now.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
And
true
we do it
to
with
different
abacus
vendors too.
and a pencil and a yellow pad.
Exactly.
So we want to make sure that we are providing you with more data and analysis to make the decisions you need to make to move along that spectrum of, well, I can see here that our prevention programs are having folks return for housing assistance. I don't really understand why that's happening. What do we do? I don't know. Let's call it OHS and talk about, possible trainings or other functions. Let's figure out why our data quality looks the way it does. Are we not doing something at program exit? Just giving you the opportunity to make that assertion about what you need to do going forward. So we are looking to ourselves to pick up sort of the responsibility on a lot of the analysis and the processing. You had a question? I'm sorry.
This is an exciting trend, I think, and one challenge that we have is in working with our subrecipient agencies, we are kind of a funnel, you know, in getting those out, those quarterly and annual reports, because they struggle, and understandably so. This is not their main focus of what they do. So at that local level, that continues to be a real challenge. And we've worked very hard the last 2 years to put best practices in with our data collection, with our subrecipients, but that end of it that continues to be a lot of work.
It is, and you know, it's different all over the state, and we know like a lot of the agencies in the ROC have shelters that aren't using HMIS. There's just a lot of different ways of utilizing the system, and there's a lot of different players that are or aren't utilizing the system as subs. And I think there are going to be a lot of different local conversations about how to make that piece of the data collection work for you. I know for some folks it's sort of expecting your subs to do it. Some of you are saying, hey, just give us the data and we'll do it, because it's just easier for us that way. So I think there's a lot of conversations about that particular topic that are going to come up really quickly. Actually, we had somebody in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I got a comment, and I'm sure it resonates for everyone here who's on the ground level working with folks. When you're starting to look at the idea of, okay, this person got homeless prevention funds, and 4 months down the line, they're back in asking for more help. I think what needs to be factored into whether, you know, the measurable outcome component of this idea and or, you know, is it an unsuccessful thing, for example, for someone to come back in after 4 months? Maybe not. I mean, you have to look at the local economy, you have to look at the cost of the rent, you have to look at the capacity of the family's ability to make enough money to cover their basic needs, the availability of HUD vouchers, et cetera, et cetera. All of that needs to play in, and then, I mean, I know on my own, in my own sense of things, a lot of times I'm looking at this idea of return on investment. So maybe I spent a ton of money, you know, a year ago to get somebody into housing who was homeless for a long time. And now, a year later, they're on the edge of homelessness again. So do I just go on to the new people, or do I go back and, okay, I've already helped this family with a lot of money, but I'm gonna help them again because they're almost right there again, and I've already spent this much. So, I mean, I don't know what the general thought is about that idea, but in some ways that looks unsuccessful and looks like a lot of money on one family. On the other hand, maybe it's super successful. So I'd like to have all that, you know, taken into consideration, have dialogues about that sort of event.
We agree. I mean, there's going to be some different determinations of what success looks like. I think Mariah mentioned earlier, we're obviously talking about people and not widgets, and measuring, you know, certain data points. And so I'm getting the 2-minute warning. But
I'm up here because this is all stuff that very much relates to the next session. So we're going to have an hour and a half to really dig into the tool and answer a lot. We're going to be in breakout groups, and I think we'll have a chance for some really good discussions around this. And I'm, you know, once we get started, I'm going to give a little bit more background on what we're doing to address some of the concerns you all are mentioning right now. So we'll get there in a second. I don't know if there's one.
Well,
Janet, and then somebody else.
Just the other, I just want to add to what Kareem was talking about. We have no control over the state mental health system or education, the schools. We have no control over that. And so when, you know, you look at what we're doing for people, it's not in a vacuum, and we just have to remember that. So so just to say you're not doing a good job, and I'm not saying this would happen, but in a few years we're going to take money away from you because your people keep coming back for more housing assistance, probably wouldn't necessarily be fair. So that we just have to keep all of that in mind. We're not the only people out there helping low-income families in this state.
That's really what the C gets to, that capacity of the community. And that was exactly where that conversation started, was listing all the things we don't have power over, and that also influence your outcomes and our outcomes as a state. So I think that that's very much in the conversation, and I don't think that in my time at this conversation, I don't think we ever said that that's how funding would be taken away, you know, that would be a rationale.
Sure.
You know, because we do recognize the complexity of what's going into each person, and we're trying to account for that. And really, it's going to be about you all setting your own goals, which Megan's going to talk about, and that's that's what we're going to be measuring, is you setting your goals, which move up to the alignment of the outcomes. So it's less about OHCS saying you did it on this one topic, on this one thing, need it. It's more about what did you say you were going to be able to do to improve in your community. Any final questions that maybe aren't on the EPIC card, just because we've got a lot of time dedicated for that? Any final comments, questions? Martha?
Sorry.
That's okay.
I guess one of the things that I've heard a lot today is the talk about rescission of funding. When I came to OHCS in 2005, the plan was to rescind funding to multiple academy for lack of performance. Since then, I have never heard a discussion about rescinding funding. I've heard plenty of talk about training and technical assistance, bringing people up to par, peer monitoring and that sort of thing, improving monitoring results, improving monitoring by OHCS, that sort of thing. This is a weird conversation for me to hear a number of times, the idea that funding would be removed from community action agencies. I mean, it's odd that it would come to the top.
I kind of think what I'm hearing, what I tried to say, at least from my perspective, is that we're not. And maybe we're overemphasizing that we're not taking away funding, and you're hearing that latter part. But like, that was one of our guiding agreements in this biennium. Absolutely, we're not touching anything. And frankly, that's not what we're leading with at all in future bienniums. So really, I mean, I don't know how to reiterate that any harder, other than our attempt to comfort you about rescission of funding is probably why we brought it up, is that we really want to make clear that that's not really on the table.
Okay, and
yeah,
I didn't realize it was on the table, so that it needed to be taken off the table.
Well, because I mean, Martine can speak to this. It was very much what our CAA representatives on the committee came in with a great concern at the beginning. So are you going to take away our money? I mean, it was a really direct question to Margaret, right? Are you going to take away our money? When are you going to take away our money? How are you? And Margaret made a very clear statement. That is not what we're here to do. That is not my intention. That is not what this budget note's for. And it is in the writing that went to the legislature. It's in our budget that is not in our plans for the first 2 years. And really, it's not in the plans for after that. We're leading with all of those technical assistance, those individualized education sort of plans, as we started calling them, really how to do individualized capacity to address it. That's what we're leading with. We're not leading at all with. It's way down the list would be any sort of punitive measures. So I can't speak as eloquently as Margaret could, but I have heard her say it so many times now that I just want to, on her behalf, reiterate that.
Thank you. So does that mean, on the flip side,
Yeah.
then the identifying what the incentive is for us to maintain these best practices? What does that look like?
Yeah.
That's a great question, and that's what we're talking a lot about. I mean, there is a compliance measure to it, but it is hopefully, again, it's setting your own goals. It's that local piece, right? It's setting your own goals that are meaningful to you. So hopefully some of it is you're creating your own incentive because you actually see that there is a value in what you're trying to do. And so some of that's coming from there, but it is also, we're going to have incentive funding available as well if you want to go above and beyond where you're at and you don't feel that that innovation piece, right? There is going to be some of that set aside as well. Do you have a better answer?
But I feel like I need to say something because we don't want to take your money. We really
I'm
don't.
going to stop even saying that.
And so, the planning that we've talked about was really like phase one. Oh my gosh, what can we really all reasonably agree upon from the next biennium? So I really hope that it wasn't naive, but we really truly believed that if we work together and put together really detailed and customized technical assistance and training programs, that everyone would be able to move at a comfortable pace along their spectrum of continuous improvement and fidelity to those models. And then I think what was in the phase 2 or 3 conversation was a piece about incentives. And that being, as Mariah said, sort of like the cherry on top, right? Like you're doing great with your funding, you're getting great outcomes for the people that you work with, and maybe you decide, hey, we want to do like this new diversion program, and we say, great, that's something we want to support you with, and you work towards that. Or we, do the shelter study, and it comes out with these recommendations that say everyone should have a such and such program. That we put something out and say, hey, there's funding available, and maybe there's not enough for everybody in this flexible fund, but maybe folks who are moving along their path really well can qualify for that. So I think that was the discussion about what incentivizing would look like, or sort of moving above and beyond, but in no way, as Mariah said, did we intend or have conversations about precision. So I just want everyone to leave here today and feel like that is not where we're going.
I do want to say, though, that the more additional things we need to track and the more involvement we need to have in an HMIS system or multiple HMIS systems, the less time for human contact. And, as it is, it's a capacity issue always. And I don't think there's anybody here who works for the homeless that doesn't put their all into it all day, and yet feel at the end of the day that I didn't do my HMIS stuff very good today, and I'm going to have to figure out how to make up for that. Oh, and I'm going to start tomorrow, and then the next thing in the door comes another homeless family, and you're right back at it. And you either say, I'm going to shut my door and I'm going to do my HMIS stuff, or I'm going to engage with this family. So it's, I know you have to show outcomes to the legislature in order to account for the continued spending and additional spending, but it really makes it hard for us on the ground level to continue to do the work that we know how to do to help the people that we know how to help. Thanks.
I think we do know that, and I think actually what we're going to talk about in this next session about the tool is going to shed a little more light on like the implementation of this and the process and how things are evaluated at the end. But we purposely designed the data points in the EPIC tool to reflect information that's in HMIS. So we don't want you to enter additional data. You're already entering a lot. We just need to be able to use it differently. And I think that's our big takeaway.
And I think I was going to comment on that too. I mean, I totally agree with you, but at the same time, I also think that this is an opportunity for OHCS to assist us, because we don't have the capacity to necessarily know, yes, we get so caught in the moment, this family, this is what I have to do, that stepping back and having somebody be able to show us, yes, you're moving in the right direction, or this is the small adjustment that you can use to move in the direction. I think this is a great opportunity to get that support.
And that's a great note to switch presentations. We are now going to hear from Megan, and she's going to do a breakout session. And use your note cards. You'll look at those note cards. Use your note cards. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Megan, do you have a card?
Yeah, go ahead.
What's that? Your card?
Nope. Okay.
We'll get it.
Thanks, Mariah. So you're seeing two of my major partners on the stage here with me. Mariah and I worked really closely together through all of our budget note work, and Megan and I worked really closely together on all things HMIS. And I just want to point out how lucky I am to have these really great folks to work with. But I also just want to point out that this is Megan Bolton, who introduced herself to you earlier. She is our senior research analyst at OHCS, and she actually works on a team with 4 other folks who are the research analysts for the entire agency. So we're really fortunate to have Julia, who's in the back, focus on homeless services. But Megan's work really spans the entire agency, and so you probably won't be surprised to know that she spends an inordinate amount of her time working on HMIS issues. So we're really glad to have her partnership on that, and she is going to take us through the Epic Outcomes tool so we can dig in a little more, and I think you are going to be able to really ask your questions here. Really get some of that detailed information that makes the implementation a little bit clearer.
And also, it's a time for us to experiment, to learn how this resonates, and to learn, this is also as much us listening to you, especially in the breakouts. We want to hear, where you go to among those performance measures, what you think you're already able to do, what you think you're not able to do, where you want help. Like when you come back in, there will be a quick activity to really gather some technical assistance themes of what really is needed. And so please, as much as Megan's here to talk to you, know that we're here to listen to you as well.
Okay.
Ooh, lucky me. Hi everyone. So we've obviously already sort of jumped in a little bit to some of the things I wanted to cover, but hopefully you all, so as part of the back of the budget note report is the Epic Outcome tool. So you might all kind of want to turn to that now. It should all be in your packets. So yeah, the goal for this next hour and a half or so is to kind of go through the tool so that we can all be on the same page about some of the performance measures and what we'll be tracking. And an update on kind of where we are as an agency to, again, build our internal capacity around HMIS, move some discussions forward around HMIS access for OHCS, data sharing, and governance, right? So I want to kind of give you an update on some of that, some of what we've talked about, but I want to give a little more detail. And then we'll do some breakout sessions. So we'll split into groups, to 4 groups, and we're going to go through some discussion questions. So some people will be with Christy, some people will be with me, some people will be with Julia, and some people will be with Sam Penny, who's in the back there, who is a program analyst in the homeless services section. And we'll take you through some sort of discussion questions, and you'll really have some time to ask your questions and to give us some really important feedback. So this is the tool, right? And so as Mariah, she kind of went through the EPIC, which are the outcomes. So that's ending homelessness, preventing homelessness, inclusion and diversity, and capacity of community. In our sessions, in our breakout sessions, we're really going to be focused on the E and the P, because those are where sort of there are some measures that we want people to start thinking about. What might you choose? Because again, we're choosing one measure from each of these 4 outcomes. So we want to kind of talk through what might people want to choose, how do you feel like you can influence this measure and this outcome, and what are your needs to get there, right? So a couple of things that I want to say too, right? As a research analyst, this excites me. Since I've started at OHCS, I've been wanting to focus more on outcomes, and I've had many conversations with many of you about how to get there, and it is a struggle. And like Christy said, I kind of do work for the whole agency and support the whole agency, and haven't been able to devote, frankly, as much time as I'd like to this issue, and that's why we're really building capacity at the agency, right, for this. So as Christy mentioned, we're hiring an HMIS administrator who can lead this work and really move a lot of these conversations forward to really wrap our head around what do we as an agency need, and how do we get there, and how do we do it really kind of more quickly than we've been able to in the past, because things are happening, right? And so obviously looking at outcomes is something, again, that really interests me, and I think a lot of the comments you've all had about external factors that really influence this is certainly something we understand and are also, really looking at right now. So our statewide housing plan had a big needs analysis, right? We were looking at housing markets, rents, vacancies. We're doing a shelter study to understand the needs there. So we're doing a lot of that work as well, so that we hope that we will be able to tell a full story. So if your outcomes are looking, if people are having a hard time accessing housing and we're seeing that, we can look at your market and sort of with the data that we're also collecting to see oh, well, you know, here are some reasons for that. We want to be able to provide that context. So we're sort of doing a number of things all at once, and our kind of hope is that ultimately, frankly, you know, we have sort of basically a, you know, really nice interactive dashboard that shows sort of those market conditions and needs, shows sort of some of your outputs, and is showing the outcomes from this tool. And that's kind of the ultimate goal. We have a lot of work to do to get there, right? But that's sort of the ultimate goal. So yeah, so as a researcher, I'm excited about this movement, and you know, I think the fact that we had the budget no and we had this work happen is what's really pushing us to find, you know, to actually do it, to hire the people we need on staff to do it, to put the time and energy and resources into this and sort of make it happen. So that's, I think, a really positive thing. As somebody who understands and has been sort of talking to a lot of you for 3 years about some of the issues with HMIS, this also terrifies me, right? I know it's scary, and you're obviously all kind of communicating that. I know that you can't get the data out that you want. I can't get anything out that I want because I've worked for the state, right? You can't sort of see statewide trends or statewide information because we don't have that access. That's frustrating for me. It has been frustrating for me for some time. So again, I think the budget note has sort of given us this push that we really needed to kind of enter into this space more intentionally. And so I'm excited for that. Excited and scared all at the same time. But what I'll say is, and, you know, as Christy mentioned, you know, for these measures are things you're all already collecting, right? So there's nothing new that you should need to collect. And if there is, like when we get into breakout groups, please tell us. We need to know that. But they should be things that you're already collecting. And some of them are already performance measures. Maybe some of them are HUD performance measures, are KPMs, you know, so they're things that there's already sort of some way to look at it, but not the way we want to look at it. So a couple of things that we're doing. So obviously we're going to be moving forward some larger HMIS conversations, and you know, I think working with CAPO on that. We're also having conversations with HUD and PHB on that. So we'll be moving those forward. In the short term, obviously we need something more quickly, right? Like you guys want to be able to see data. We want to be able to start establishing baselines and goals. So we're working with PHB. We meet with them monthly. And we are going to be we're kind of drafting an agreement now to enter into some work with PHB and WellSky to create a custom OHCS report, right? So that this is that is based in this. And I will say we're also talking about making it kind of an all-around report for OHCS so that it could replace quarterly reports and annual reports. Right, it should give us everything we need, and it should give us everything we need in the way that we need it. So you might notice, right, so there's these different performance measures, which I'll go through in a second, and all of them really need to be, you know, they need to be disaggregated by race and ethnicity, we need to understand veteran status, different outcomes for veterans, and for families with children. So that's a lot of detail that we cannot get right now, right, out of Service Point in any report. So we'll be working with WellSky and PHB on that. So we're entering into that contract hopefully very soon. And in the meantime, we've been working with PHB on kind of a master query report that allows us to see de-identified client level data across the system. And some of the folks in Multnomah County in the Joint Office have a similar master query and already have some script written for our statistical software that allows them to create Tableau dashboards with that data. And so, you know, client level data is obviously a lot better to use to look at outcomes by different demographics. So we're kind of looking at that to see if that also gives us some of the information we need right away to give you. And we're actually going to probably be working with you. Like we want to look at that raw data, that master data. We're probably going to start with a couple of agencies and to try to build some reports and see if it matches at all what it should, because we have no idea. So those are kind of the things we're starting with right now. We tried to start that basically in January. We knew this was happening, right? So we started having these meetings and trying to figure out some short-term solutions as quickly as we can. It's not perfect, it's not ideal, but it's sort of, we want to at least be able to start working towards understanding how we can get this data and how we can display it and how you can use it. You know, so the idea is that we're all using the same system. And I will say, you know, even though you may only be choosing one of these measures, obviously the report that we're going to build will just, you know, be able to show it all. So you'll be able to obviously track kind of all of the measures, but then you can focus in on the one that you're most interested in, the one you think you have the most influence over. So that's the idea there. So really quickly, because I want to get us into our breakout groups, let's just go through them really quickly so we all kind of hear them and can start thinking about them. So in ending homelessness, we are looking, there's 4 measures for this one. The percentage of households or persons entering programs from unsheltered locations as defined by sleeping in places not meant for human habitation. This is sort of, you know, we want to try to ensure that we're really addressing that high number of unsheltered people experiencing homelessness across the state, right? So let's look at how well are we reaching the unsheltered population. Length of participation in homeless programs is a proxy for measuring the ability to move participants to permanent housing. And then I'm just going to read the next one too. Length of time homeless system-wide as a proxy for measuring the ability of participants to move to and sustain permanent housing across jurisdictions over time. So the first one there is more about length of time in a particular kind of project type, or kind of getting a particular service. The next one is more length of time homeless overall. So what's the length of time someone's actually experiencing homeless versus how long are they in a shelter or transitional housing. And that second one, the length of time homeless system-wide, I do want to kind of point out that the idea there is to look, again, system-wide across the state. So maybe somebody's coming into one community action agency, leaving and going to another one, and you might not be capturing that, but we want to sort of be able to understand it as a state. That's a trickier one, and frankly also, right, something that we haven't sort of talked about yet, but we really also need to bring COCs to the table, and we've had a lot of discussions with COCs about data sharing and data access as well, right? To build that coordinated system that is our priority as a state in the statewide housing plan, we need everyone to be working together, and we need us all to be kind of looking at the data and thinking about it, right? So that piece, I'll be honest, is really tricky right now because we don't have that access. But that's, again, part of that larger governance conversation and that larger sort of data sharing conversation. And then returns to homelessness after previous exit to permanent housing. So our people, that's a HUD KPM, or HUD's, not KPM's, SPM, system performance measure, of our people coming back into the system after exiting to permanent housing. On the preventing homelessness, there's the 2 measures that Mariah kind of mentioned. Each CAA representative had a very different feeling on. But we have increase in household income and our mainstream benefits as a proxy for increased ability to sustain housing when assistance ends, and percentage of households who received prevention assistance but returned for housing assistance within 1 year. The other 2 outcomes, inclusion and diversity and capacity and community, we're not going to focus on in our breakout sessions. I will note the inclusion and diversity one. So these are based on the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmarks, or GDIB. You should have in your folders like maybe 4 kind of summary pages on what those are, some kind of background to what that is. There's going to be, between OHCS and CAAs, a work group to kind of figure out a little bit in more detail what measures are we going to pick and how are we going to measure progress for those. And then on capacity of community, this is really, again, about increasing collaboration with community partners, right? So that's the EPIC tool. So I'm gonna stop there. I think there's anything I missed.
I think I just,
Yeah.
So I just want to reiterate that, you know, the E and the P are really those HMIS data points. There's data in the system. You are capturing it. We just can't get it out in the right form currently. And then for the I and the C, those we imagine are really like narratives that we're going to get from you, right? That's going to be the we, as an agency, went through the GDIB and decided that to be a more inclusive organization, we are gonna focus on the HR aspects of our work. And we do not have the entire GDIB printed for you in your packet because it's huge. But there are some copies, I believe, on the resource table if you wanna pick one up and take a look at it. But one of the reasons that we decided to use that one was because, one, community action agencies and our partnering states are already using it, and there's training and there's already some success being built there. But two is because it's a tangible process for a very intangible thing, right? So it's already mapped out by different aspect of your agency. I mentioned HR, that's one thing. This is a tool that's being used, across the country for different types of organizations, not just CAAs. So there's pieces about logistics and other things that you may not find are super relevant to you, but you're able to really narrow your focus. And then there are sort of the things that you do under that category, right? Like, here are the things that will make sure that your organization becomes more inclusive in its work. And then there are proficiency levels that you can achieve through that process. So you're 0 to 25% proficient in this particular area, or 26 to 50%. And that allows you some way of sort of tracking where you've been and knowing what you need going forward because you've decided to pursue that. So it's a whole big thing that we're not going to get into really in any detail today, but we invite you to take a look at that little 2-pager, 4-pager summary and pick up another copy. You can find it online as well. But what we're really thinking is that what that column looks like is you guys identifying the goals for yourself, charting on the path, and we're doing quarterly updates to see if you're meeting your own goals and if you need more support. And then regarding the capacity in the community section, it will be like that as well too. So you are going to choose which topic you're going to focus on, and maybe you have a healthy HSP program and you really want to focus on increasing your collaborations with partners in education and DHS. You double down on those efforts, and you are giving us updates every quarter about what that looks like for you and your community. So I mentioned this is all a work in progress, and we are going to be figuring this out to give you more tangible information soon. But I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions so far about any of the outcome categories. Aren't you tired of listening to us?
Yeah. And I'll just add, one more thing. Just, you can see, so the language is here, but, when you start really thinking about it, it's still a little open to interpretation, right? And so as we are looking to build specs for reports with WellSky, or understand how we actually get this data from a master query, like, your input right now is actually really great timing because we're beginning that process of kind of building that out. So, as we're in the breakout groups, feel free to kind of provide us with some feedback on like how best to really look at this from the data that you all collect. And again, I think, the first 2 years are really about us figuring this out together. So I forgot to mention, I think we're also going to be kind of doing a lot of outreach, coming to the agencies directly to kind of talk through this, understand, right here, we're going to try to understand some of the needs you have, but I think we really want to have time with each agency to sit down and understand, your assessment process and what how you're doing data entry and where this, what this data looks like, and how we can help you, again, kind of report it out and then improve in all of those areas. So, here's what we're going to do. Those dots that came in important in the introductions are important now as well. So I think we've got the blue dots. Yes, the blue dots are going to be in room 102 with Sam, who's right back there. Anybody with a blue dot on your name tag will go with Sam. Anybody with a green dot is going to be in room 101 with Julia. Julia, raise your hand. That's a green dot will be with Julia.
No.
And 101. And then the red dots, there's a big group of you. You'll stay in here, and half of you will be with Christy, and half of you will be with me. Let's see, she's looked those up.
Oh, blue. What color?